Hello, I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. Welcome to One to One. Each week, we address issues of timely and timeless concern with newsmakers and the journalists who report on them, with artists, writers, scientists, educators, activists, social scientists, government leaders. We speak with each one to one. Human trafficking, the exploitation of human beings for the purposes of sex or labor, has been much in the news lately. Last month, the New York Times ran an editorial condemning the practice. CNN has made it the subject of several months' worth of stories, including a documentary hosted by actress Demi Moore. And the Bloomberg administration has just released a public service announcement urging New Yorkers who know about human trafficking to come forward and report it to the authorities. Deputy Mayor for Legal Affairs Carol Robles-Román, who advises the mayor in many areas, is spearheading the campaign to educate the public about human trafficking, which affects thousands of persons in the United States each year. We'll find out what it is, who are the victims and victimizers, how it operates, and what public officials can do to end it. Welcome. Hi. I want to start out by taking a look at the public service announcement that the city is running.
Fact. Innocent people are deceived, then bought and sold like property. They are promised jobs, then held against their will. They are offered work, then forced to give up their wages, their papers, their freedom. This is human trafficking. Let's call an end to human trafficking. You can help. Please call 311 for more information, or in the case of an emergency, call 911.
So why is the city doing this now?
The city is looking to take a step back in our enforcement efforts with combating human trafficking. We have met with advocates, we've met with law enforcement, we've met with people who have worked one-on-one with a lot of victims. And one of the issues that we would just hear over and over again is that there is just a dearth of information. Most New Yorkers are just not cognizant of what human trafficking is, and even worse than that is many victims themselves are victims of trafficking and they don't even realize it. So we said, let's take two steps back, let's put together a really rich public-private partnership of people who wanted to present a message, and it would be an opportunity for us to educate New Yorkers, to educate ourselves, because even in doing this, I learned a great deal. Everybody who touched this project learned a great deal. And this would be our service to New Yorkers. Let's educate everybody. What is human trafficking? What you can do about it? And if you're a victim of human trafficking, what you can do about it, where you can go, and what you can do about it.
So what is human trafficking?
Human trafficking is the exploitation of a person, usually done by force, coercion, and they are exploited many times in several ways. It could be labor trafficking, where they're being forced to work for low wages or just tips.
Often immigrants who are brought here with the promise of work and then find they're basically in virtual slavery.
That's one version. And Sheryl, you used the word slavery, and that's really what it is. And I think when you address victims directly, when you put it exactly in those terms, I think it's much easier to get your arms around. Then you have sex trafficking, where many times girls, I have to imagine it also happens to young boys as well, but according to the federal authorities that we've spoken to, they have not seen a lot of that in terms of prosecutions. But young girls are lured into positions and then are beaten or drugged into prostitution. So we see it on the domestic side. We see cases where it's
Like housekeepers, maids who...
On the domestic side, when I say the domestic side, I mean in
the
terms
U.S.,
of
okay.
in the United States.
Right.
And it could be a girl from Queens, it could be a girl from Brooklyn, it could be a girl from Manhattan, when I talk on the domestic side and on the sex trafficking, or it could be on the international side.
Do we have an idea of what the breakdown is in terms of the victims? Do they tend to be immigrants? Do most of them tend to be women? Are there more domestically than international, or vice versa?
It's a great question. The data in this area is so scarce at this point. In 2006, the governor of the state of New York signed state legislation for human trafficking. And
making it a state crime, a felony.
That's correct.
Okay.
Making it a state crime, and part of that statute was also commencing data keeping for the state of New York. And I think in the time since 2006, the state of New York has seen approximately 72 prosecutions. And of those 72, I think about 55 of them have been in New York City.
Okay.
So we have that breakdown in terms of data. I think 20 of those have been people under the age of 18. And 15 of those were domestic trafficking.
Okay.
And what we have seen on the federal side, we have seen a number of cases where they have been international rings. There was one last November where they had an international smuggling ring from China, where they were smuggling in
workers
people.
Over here.
They were smuggling in workers for the purposes of working in restaurants. And that took a very serious dimension, and that case is currently pending.
So is this organized crime, or is it a lot of just unscrupulous pimps and business owners?
That particular case was organized. There was a case, I think soon thereafter, with the Gambino crime family. About 22 people were indicted, and one of the charges was sex trafficking. So you have organized crime, you have organized gangs, and then you have sort of the nickel and dime ones as well. Mm-hmm. So there's no one set profile, but it is taking a very dangerous turn in that organized crime, which does guns and drugs, are also involved in the trafficking of humans.
Are there certain countries, certain areas of the world from which we get a lot of trafficked victims? I mean, I get the sense that China, other Asian countries, China perhaps workers and people coming over here to work, perhaps from some of the other Asian countries, whether it's India or Thailand, or Eastern European countries, former members of the Soviet Union, are feeding into the sex trafficking trade. I mean, do you have any sense of where these people are, who's doing this trafficking?
The three cases that I just mentioned, one of them had to do with China,
okay.
Where they were trafficking Chinese, I think pretty much undocumented individuals. They had a case also, Operation Getaway, I think was Korean.
Okay.
Where it was a large Korean population that they were bringing in. So you have Chinese, you have Korean, and you also hear, and again, I haven't seen the cases on the federal side, you see Thailand issues as
okay.
well being mentioned. There's no set profile. It's very hard on the data side. What the federal prosecutors will tell you in terms of what their obstacles often are is getting victims to cooperate with law enforcement. And that's one of the issues on the PSA as well, is kind of delivering a message to folks that may see something and not quite know what it is, mm-hmm. and at the same time to potential victims, and letting them know that there is a place where you can go. And law enforcement, although in their country may be sort of a scary enterprise, here they do have very strong relationships with nonprofits and with other entities that can actually help them heal, help them get whole, and obviously from the law enforcement's perspective, to be in a position to then go after the traffickers
right.
in a very aggressive way.
Right. We're going to take a short break, but then we'll be back with more with Carol Robles-Román, Deputy Mayor for Legal Affairs, after the following message.
One, two, three, four, five, six, seven.
The smallest moments can have the biggest impact on a child's life.
Go Dad, go Dad.
Take time to be a dad today.
Welcome back to One to One. I'm Sheryl McCarthy of the City University of New York. I'm talking with Carol Robles-Román, Deputy Mayor for Legal Affairs, about the subject of human trafficking. Talking about modern-day slavery, I know there's a horrible case in Long Island a few years ago about a very wealthy couple, I think he was Indian, she was Indonesian, who were convicted of basically holding their housekeeper, I think 2 housekeepers, in virtual slavery for many, many years. It's against federal law. Human trafficking violates federal law. We now have the state law against it, and then we have laws against prostitution, and with laws against, with the wage and hour laws. Who's enforcing these laws? I don't read about a lot of cases like this. So who's enforcing these laws?
You have the state law, you would have the district attorneys. So in the city of New York, the 5 district attorneys actually are very aggressive. John Jay was in the news because, regrettably, there was a very serious case that was identified. And it was actually a John Jay student who was being trafficked. She had been trafficked since the age of 13, and she had the wherewithal to confide in one of her professors. And he took the time to speak with her and to notice that there was something not quite right. And he gave a very lengthy interview to the New York Times in order to make sure that other professors would sort of take notice. And he referred her to the district attorney's office of Brooklyn. Now, as luck would have it, the professor was a former assistant district attorney from Brooklyn. And his mentor, Charles Hines, has an anti-trafficking task force. So the anti-trafficking task force looked into her allegations and, in fact, brought charges against the trafficker. And
Right.
it turned out it wasn't one person, it was several people.
Okay.
So that is a really strong example of the type of efforts that local law enforcement is doing. Number one, in looking at the state statute, putting together resources. In Brooklyn, we have seen a disproportionate share of a lot of the domestic trafficking, young girls in a similar situation like the John Jay student. And his office has worked very hard to put together a really incredible team. They have done a lot of community outreach. They did a whole campaign themselves last year with Sarah Jessica Parker, just really bringing the message home. And what was great about what they did, similar to what we're trying to do, is going to the grassroots level, to going to the beauty parlors, to going into the small shops, to going to the churches, the places where people speak and talk, and where even a victim may go and interact with folks.
And the basic message, which is the message of your PSA, is if you see something, say something.
See something, say something. and having it done as well by something like the DA's office, the district attorney's office, which is the very entity that's prosecuting and that's bringing the cases, it has to bring a feeling to victims and to people who may potentially have information. Hey, I'm in the beauty parlor and they're coming directly to me to give this information. So I think it takes the sting out if you may be sort of resistant or nervous or scared about cooperating with law enforcement. You do have dedicated prosecutors. You do have people who are specifically trained in the area of human trafficking to interview, for example, let's go back to our John Jay student, interview her. They're experts in the area, and they're
recognize that that's what she's suffering from. That's what's going on.
Right, because they're not going to walk through the door, Cheryl. They're not going to say, "Hi,
I'm
Mr.
being
Dean.
trafficked."
I'm being trafficked,
Right.
and these are the dates, and these are the times, and this is how it happened, and this is all the information that you need. It's in a file, and I'll be back on Monday. It actually is a very, very slow, very deliberate process. Many times, from what we understand from both the medical profession as well as many of the nonprofits who service victims, it takes months and sometimes years for them to feel whole and to heal.
But you said there are indicators sometimes that doctors get when they're dealing with people who've been trafficked. There are certain indicators by if they have poor dental work, in addition to perhaps a lot of gynecological diseases. These may be signs that it's a person being trafficked.
That's exactly right. We've spoken to many folks. The Health and Hospitals Corporation has been doing some really great work in the area of people who are torture victims, and Gouverneur has an excellent program where they work with traffic victims. And we've visited the hospital and we've spoken to them and say, what can you share with us? They said, well, we'll meet somebody, and if we are taking care of them and they haven't necessarily identified, but we see very poor dental, digestive problems, the gynecological, and many times they're not allowed to speak for themselves, or there's somebody standing by, ostensibly acting like a translator. Those are all signs.
How about airport officials? Because I gather that a lot of the trafficked people come in through Kennedy Airport is where they come in through. Are there ways of identifying people who may be being brought into this country for for these purposes?
That's an excellent idea, and we have been exploring that in terms of how to take education and how to get it into places very one-on-one where people may potentially get in contact with victims. One senator, for example, Senator Peralta, has a very interesting bill pending that he has introduced with taxi drivers, saying, you know, TLC and other related entities should train taxi drivers to the signs of trafficking. Because when you think of domestic trafficking,
Right.
Especially his area is Jackson Heights, the girls would get around through ostensibly either livery cabs or traditional taxis. And so his position is, and it's an interesting one, and we're actually scheduled to talk more about it, taxi drivers is one very important area that they should be training them to recognize the signs.
And that they could at least give the woman information about where to go.
That's exactly
interesting.
right.
That is
or,
interesting.
you know, you drop somebody off and you say, you know, I have a bad feeling about this, and I'm gonna call somebody. And if I'm wrong, I'm wrong. But if I'm right, you may have actually saved a life.
Right.
So that's
Right.
it's important. And I think a lot of people would like to do the right thing, but they don't know what to do, and they don't know, you know, am I being a busybody? And so, you know, let's call an end to human trafficking. You know, see it, know it, and then report it.
I hear a lot about restaurants that in the city that are accused of abusing their workers. I mean, I've heard about Ollie's in particular, Saigon Grill, you know, where you hear the workers are being paid like $1.50 an hour and having their tips taken and having to work, you know, 80 hours a week. Those kinds of cases those are not necessarily trafficking cases. Those might be more wage and hour type abuses.
My understanding on the two cases that you cited, those were almost in the guise of class actions where they pursued them with the Department of Labor or they pursued them civilly in terms of getting back the lost wages, getting the tips that they hadn't gotten, and making sure that the fair labor laws were enforced in terms of time and leave. They may have been trafficking as well, but those issues were not presented. They didn't present them as these folks were being trafficked. They did not go, my understanding is, sort of the criminal route. Traditionally, in those kind of cases, they may be trafficking, but there may also be, you know, horrible working conditions of unscrupulous business owners that are not following wage and hour
And they can get away with it because these are often undocumented immigrants.
Often undocumented, often not knowing what, you know, what the fair labor and what the fair labor laws are. And in that particular case, that you had, I think, lawyers who came in as well as labor advocates who sat down with them and explained to them, and they pursued it through the civil remedies.
Looking at sex trafficking again, I have been told that it's a flaw in the criminal justice system that when you have young women, often underage women, who are being trafficked, that instead of just helping them get out of the situation, these women are often prosecuted for prostitution. And that, you know, instead of sending them to jail, it would be better if the city, the state had places where you could, I mean, shelters or places where you could send the women to help them get themselves back together instead of shipping them off to Rikers Island or upstate someplace. Are there any such programs or facilities for women who've been victims of sex trafficking?
There are programs, there are facilities. They are limited in number. We probably should be doing more in that area. There is a difficulty in prosecuting those type of cases. I'm not a prosecutor, but from what I understand, many times, and again, it's getting the victim to come forward and say, you know, I'm not a prostitute. I'm doing this because I'm a victim of trafficking, if in fact it's a trafficking situation. Many times they're fearful. They've been told by their pimps to lie. Many times they're actually underage and they're in criminal court where they've been told, don't go into the family court system because family court would be more probing, or at least that's the impression. So yes, we should have more services. And part of getting there is really working with the victims to help them understand that there is a place where they can self-identify and get the assistance that they need.
So if I'm an underage woman who's been forced into prostitution, where might I go for help? Are there nonprofits that I might go to that might help me?
Well, the first thing that I would encourage somebody to do is call 311. And 311 has a human trafficking resource division. And they would refer that person to nonprofits. And if it looks like they're in a dangerous situation, they would then contact 911. So it's just an easy number to remember. If they have the ability to take a step back, and if they have like a wonderful professor or somebody, or an educator or a teacher or somebody in church that they could say, help me do this, there are several nonprofits that could be of assistance. You have Safe Horizon, you have GEMS, which is one of the best nonprofits. Rachel Lloyd runs an excellent program. GEMS stands for Girls Empowerment Mentoring Services. Sanctuary for Families, also another very, very strong, credible nonprofit working with sort of a host of different counseling centers, etc. So there are places that they can go. If they're in the Bronx, there's a place called Community Solutions, I believe, and they will assist. And so I say that over and over again because there are resources. The one thing that I would really almost beg, let's say somebody is watching this and they think they know something, tell somebody. There is somebody in your life that you can probably trust, and just take that leap the same way the young student did, and on a leap of faith, confided in her professor, and then didn't even confide initially. He just started talking about different things, and he, it didn't sound right to him, and he probed, and he took a particular interest and saw it through. So there are people who can help. And there are nonprofits that are trained and that have resources. And if they don't want to go to the police initially, because there's this sense that, oh, you got to go to the police right away. No, they're not going to go. I've been working with the victim community for almost 25 years. And I started with working with the domestic violence community. And at that time, the notion was, oh, you got to go to the police, you got to go to the DA's office. Great, but 3/4 of the victims, they don't want that, and you're not going. If you force it in that direction, it's just not going to happen. So my goal, the city's goal, is to provide choices and avenues that folks can pursue.
Right. We've got about a minute and a half left. Are there additional things that you think need to be done from a public policy standpoint to deal with this problem of human trafficking?
From a public policy perspective, I see a number of things that we need to do, and we're doing them. We need to work hand in glove as a community. Law enforcement is doing work. The nonprofit community is doing work. You have the advocacy community doing work. We all have to be sitting around the table at the same time, sharing information, sharing data. That becomes a very big issue. I think the federal government has been doing very interesting work in terms of funding certain programs. I think it has to be taken to another level. We've been having excellent conversations, for example, with Congresswoman Maloney, who takes a very strong interest in this. And so we need people like Congresswoman Maloney and other Congresspeople to come to the table. It's a national issue. Put it on the national agenda. And once you put it on the national agenda, there will be more funding, and those type of collaborations will be more seamless. Right now, everyone's doing good work, and we have to do it together, collaboratively. Law enforcement can do what they do, but unless we have the partnership with the nonprofits and with the private sector. I mean, you raised, Sheryl, several type of entities that may potentially get involved with human trafficking without even realizing it. Oh, I got some new restaurant employees for you. They start on Monday. You don't inquire, something's a little bit suspicious. So we all play a role here, and it's only through public information, through shows such as this, through professors like Professor Kern at John Jay, that everybody will start sort of talking the same language on what this is, how we can identify it, and then what are the avenues to help victims.
I'm going to have to stop you because we're out of time, but I want to thank Deputy Mayor Carol Robles-Román. If you or someone you know is a victim of human trafficking, please call 311, or in case of an emergency, 911. Or for more information, go to nyc.gov/human trafficking. And we're going to take another look before we leave at the PSA that the city is running right now.
Fact. Innocent people are deceived, then bought and sold like property. They are promised jobs, then held against their will. They are offered work, then forced to give up their wages, their papers, their freedom. This is human trafficking. Let's call an end to human trafficking. You can help. Please call 311 for more information, or in the case of an emergency, call 911.
For the City University of New York and 1 to 1, I'm Sheryl McCarthy.